Hi, and welcome to the last part of Module 2-4 Python Basics. And in this section, we're going to very briefly review object-oriented programming. And for that, we're going to look at objects and classes. What do they mean? How do you create a class? And then how do you create an object from that class? And so this is sort of the foundation of object-oriented programming, which is a little different than functional programming. But you don't have to choose one or the other. It's good to know how to use them both because they can both be useful depending on the scenario. So with that, let's get started with creating a class. And so a class is going to be a blueprint for that object that you're going to create. So if we create a patient class, we're going to use the class keyword patient. And so now this is the patient class that you can create patient objects from. And so if you're going to have a giant list of patients, they will all follow this same blueprint. And so this can be a scenario where using object-oriented programming would be useful because there's no need to just hand type all of that. Once you create this patient class, it's going to add a lot of information and functionality to your patient objects that you would create. So like I mentioned, we get started with just using the class keyword and patient, and then we use the constructor. So this is the double underscore init method, and we're going to always start with this one and then use self. And so we're going to use that self keyword and then all of the attributes that we want the patient class to have. So we want the patient to have a name, an age, and for the purposes of this example, drug allergies and GFR or renal function. So that constructor is going to initialize a new patient and give them these 4 attributes. And to assign those attributes, we want to use that self keyword .name, .age, .drug allergies, .gfr, and assign those back to what the attribute is actually going to be. And so we can also make some methods here. So if we want to add an allergy, we can create a little method here to add an allergy. We can search for allergies. So this method is allergic. It's going to search to see if a patient is allergic to a particular drug. And then if we need to update the GFR, we can run this method to update the patient's renal function. Okay, so when we run this, you're not going to see any output here, but now we've defined that class, the patient class, so let's use it. So let's create a new object, patient1. You can call that anything you want to, or you could use a patient ID here, but it's going to be an instance of that patient class. So we'll use the, notice we use the capital letter patient here to let Python know we're instantiating an instance of the patient class, and then we're going to give this patient a name, an age, drug allergies, and an initial GFR. Now, if we want to add an allergy, we can add an allergy. So we see the initial allergy is just penicillin, but the patient says, I'm also allergic to aspirin. So we can use this patient object, so patient1, and then add allergy, which was that method that we defined up here. And it's going to add aspirin to the patient's allergies. Now we can use the isAllergic method that we defined up here to look and see if the patient is allergic to aspirin. And this will print out yes or no, depending on if we find out that the patient has aspirin in their allergy list. So, and then we can use the update underscore GFR method to update the patient's GFR. So let's say it's 90 to start. They've taken a medication that reduces their renal function, and so it drops a little bit, so we need to update that patient's GFR. Probably not much of a difference here from 90 to 86, but just to illustrate that you could update the patient's GFR using this method here that we defined. And then next we're going to print all this to see what it looks like. So we're going to print the patient's name, the patient's age, their drug allergies, which should be updated to include aspirin and penicillin, and then this updated GFR. So we initialized it at 90, but now the patient's GFR is 86.5, and so it should print out this updated GFR from the patient as well. So let's look at this and see what we got. Is the patient allergic to aspirin? Yes, because we added that allergy. Patient, their name, Jane Doe, age 54, those haven't changed. Drug allergies, penicillin we started with, and then we added aspirin. And then we see the updated GFR 86.5. Now, one thing to note here is that in this search, if the patient, if we're looking at all lowercase, this should say no. So the patient is not allergic to aspirin with a lowercase a, which obviously doesn't make any clinical sense. So we would need to adjust this code a little bit to account for that. But just so you know, we'll have to make sure, you would have to make sure to write in some additional code to catch these scenarios. The patient is clearly allergic to aspirin, we added that, but if your search or your added allergy was an A here and you're looking for capital A aspirin, that's still going to be a no. So just a little bit of a gotcha there. So make sure, you know, we can add more code to ensure we wouldn't have that issue if we were really doing this as a project that was going to be live with patient care. But all of this was just meant to illustrate a brief example of object-oriented programming, creating a class, and then creating an object of that class with those attributes that we defined earlier. All right, with that, we've wrapped up Module 2, the entirety of Python Basics. I hope that gives you a little bit of a background and some confidence in coding, that when we move forward, you know what some of this Python code means. So with that, I will see you in Module 3.